Hi! So over the next few weeks I'm going to be making Lucy Gray's outfit from the new Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes Hunger Games film. I'm going to do it in a little bit of a vlog style, so there'll be multiple videos if you want to come back and watch them. But today's I'm going to be making her bodice, which will be hand painted, and I'm going to make it as if it was a historical stays, except with a few adjustments. So we shall see how it goes. Right, so to start off I used an old Ralph Pink pattern, which was a stays, which kind of gave the element of the historicalness to the pattern because it's all boned, which makes it a little bit more comfortable to wear and allows it to look a little bit more like the film version. So I adapted that pretty much from the pattern, and you can see me adding separate panels on and cutting them off and then just constantly going up to the mirror and checking it, because that was really the most important part, was to make sure that it looked the same or very similar on me as it did on Rachel in the film. Another thing that was really important at this stage was watching the reference images, because a lot of the stuff that's hidden within the images you can kind of pick out. So I had a little bit trouble later on, as you'll see, trying to figure out the painting that goes up the side of the bodice, which was a little bit hidden in the trailer, but I found some reference images from someone at a museum. So it's really interesting to have to kind of search for that. But I can't even tell you how many times I watched that trailer. It's a great trailer. It just has so many tiny details in the costumes, which you only really get to see sort of several watches on, which were really interesting to incorporate into my cosplay version. This was kind of the stage where I was trying to figure out where all the seam lines went. So by looking at the images, I figured out that there was like a side front seam and then a side back seam, which kind of linked the whole costume together. So I ended up drawing them on the pattern pieces and cutting the pattern pieces so that I had new pattern pieces, which weren't the seam lines on the original pieces. It's a little bit confusing, but there you go. Next, I drew on new bone lines, which I went sort of vertically down the front of the bodice, which allowed it to have no wrinkles when it was worn, pretty much. So next I'm going to trace these patterns onto the cotton drill, which will be the back layer. And then I'm going to trace around this onto the top layer, because this one will have all of the bone channels in, and this will have no markings at all, to make it look really clean. Okay, so I think I've marked all of the bone channels correctly. I'm not entirely sure, I guess we'll figure that one out. But next I'm gonna mark out on here, or trace all of these pieces. This will be the outside layer, so it won't have any markings on it at all, and all of these bone channels will be hidden behind the leather anyway, so if I make any big mistakes, you're probably not going to see them. I'm going to kind of hope that I don't, but we will see. This just took a lot of time. I mean, as you can see, I was trying to space out the bone channels a little bit around the bust area, and then having them more sort of together at the front, because historically you would have for all intents and purposes, a stick down the front of the stays, which would allow it to stay flat. But in this version I didn't have that, so I was trying to simulate it in that way. I was also, on the back, I tried to make them slightly closer together with just one row gap in between them. This was mainly to save material, but also it didn't really need it. And then along the panels at the back, I decided to put lots of channels just to make sure that the eyelets were more supported and that it could be a fully functioning garment. So I finished doing all of the channels in the pieces, I'm not too bothered about finishing off all of these little stitch lines at the bottom, because this will all be covered with the leather panel that goes over the top of each piece and the bias binding that goes around the edge. So for the inside bones, I'm going to be using zip ties, which is a surprisingly cheap option, and it does pretty much the same thing when you don't need an excessive amount of support and stays. So I bought a whole load of them, and I'm just going to slot them into place and sand them down so that the corners don't pop out. There was a lot of bone channels on this project, just a whole load of them, so it took me a while to just sit and sew them all. But then again, I kind of find it oddly relaxing, so it wasn't too bad, and I just watched a lot of TV. Just as a little note, if anyone ever tries to attempt this, I kept finding these tiny bits of black zip tie plastic for ages after I finished this. So they never go away, they're just too tiny and they refuse to be vacuumed. Right, so now that I've finished doing all of the sewing, I've cut out all of the pieces in leather, which will be the overlay for it. And they're all slightly bigger than the panel that they're meant for, so that I can do the base layer of the cream greyish colour and then sew them on around the outside and kind of cut them to shape, because when you put the bones in, it moves and manipulates the material, so it's often not the same size as it was in the pattern, and mine shrank a little bit, so this is just an easier way to make sure that everything lines up. And once this is on, I can paint the actual drawing and the flowers and everything. So here I ended up adding the leather layer on top of the base layer and then sewing along the purple seam lines after I cut them in place, and then just re-trimming it to make it look like it does in the film. So that you could see them and it kind of matched the way that it looks in the film. Just prepping the back of the panels for the eyelets. I've herringboned the back seam, because in all of the pictures I've seen you can't actually see any stitch lines on the back, so I'm assuming it's just folded over, and I've herringboned them down. I've also started to, whatever that one's called, I can't remember what it's called, be like flat, like rolled hem, that one, on the felled seams. I have a feeling it might be felled seams, I will have to check that later, on both of the sides as well, but I have yet to finish them on this side. So I'm going to go ahead and put the eyelets in now. Just sewing all of the seams flat at the minute, so that they lie sort of completely flat against the body. Kind of folding in each seam underneath it and slip stitching down the edge. So next up I'm going to do the binding. I got this before I started the project and I thought it would be the right width, but on the original picture it's kind of the same width as this bit. So I'm going to fold it over and iron it again so that it's like that on both sides, and then at least it's kind of the same width that it's meant to be, and it'll also make it a little bit, hopefully a little bit smoother, but we'll see. This absolutely killed my hands, but I think it was well worth it. The leather was a little bit tough to sew through. But in the end, I think it looks right, and the width of the bias binding turned out to be exactly perfect, so it worked out really well in the end. I made these templates using loads and loads of reference images, so I'm pretty happy with how they are currently, just like the basic shapes, so that I can transfer them onto the whole bodice. I have a pin, and because I painted this with acrylic paint and it's not yet sealed, I'm literally gonna stab through the paper and it will create like a little dotted line as to where my design should be. So I think it'll work. Yeah, it didn't work. So I ended up just transferring the pattern by tracing over it in a thick pencil and then laying it over the top and rubbing the pencil against the piece of paper to transfer one pattern onto one side onto the leather on the bodice, which worked so much better than my original plan, and at least that way it kind of looks like what it's meant to now. But yeah, no, don't go for the first method, it doesn't do anything. I thought I was being clever, apparently I wasn't. Right, so we're now kind of on the final step, which was the painting, which was so much fun. I haven't painted in ages, so I figured it was a nice little challenge. I really just mixed all of the pieces together, tried to match them best to the screen version and had loads of reference images up, and then just decided to go for it. So I started off doing all of the snakes first and then moved on to the flowers, and eventually just added those tiny little finishing touches, and I think it came out really well, so I'm really happy with it. This was one of those pieces where, as you were painting it, you were realising so many tiny little details that the costume designers just kind of like stuck in. And I mean, the snakes as the bow was just so beautiful. And I loved painting those. It was kind of, you know, just rough and messy, but it came out really well, I think. And all of the flowers meaning different things. There's a great article online somewhere where it just deep dives into everything that's on this bodice. And there's little Katniss poking out in between all of the flowers on the front, and it just, I think it fits the character so well, it's so well done. This would be also a great time to say that there are a lot more images of what I've done on my Instagram if anyone wants to go and have a look. I'm Jenny's Designs and Costuming, which is also in the description. Yay! Right, it's done. This is it. This is the final bodice. I'm so happy with how it turned out. I posted it on my Instagram just to make it even better. Rachel liked it, and so that just made my week. I am really happy with it. If there's anything else anyone wants to ask questions about, you can just pop them in the description, comment section. And yeah, just follow me on Instagram. I'll be posting the skirt tutorial and the blouse tutorial probably next week. So make sure you subscribe and you can come back for those. Thanks so much for watching.